Greatness does not always reveal itself in triumph. Sometimes it arrives without permission, without warning, and without a single line of script to contain it. What happened on that soundstage was not planned, not prepared, and not remotely expected, yet it shook everyone present with the force of an emotional event that felt larger than Hollywood itself. In a single moment, James Spader, one of the most enigmatic figures in contemporary cinema, shattered the invisible boundary between veteran mastery and rising brilliance, delivering a tribute so raw and unapologetically honest that the entire studio froze, unable to process what they were witnessing. Crew members who had spent decades on film sets would later confess that they had never experienced anything like it. They had seen actors break down, explode, improvise, even clash. But this was different. This felt like someone had opened a hidden door inside the craft of acting and allowed the room to glimpse something sacred. It happened without warning, erupting from a silence so dense that every breath felt amplified, as if the air itself were holding a secret that was finally ready to speak. Menglong had just finished performing one of the most haunting scenes of the production, a moment executed with such controlled emotion that the atmosphere seemed to vibrate long after the director called for a break. His eyes still carried the afterglow of the performance, a quiet fire that refused to fade. His presence, poised at the edge of shadow and light, made the studio feel smaller, as though his energy had filled the space with its own gravitational pull. And then Spader stepped out of the background. He did not approach him as a co-star. He approached him as someone who had just witnessed a revelation. His expression was solemn, almost reverent, and the weight of his silence was so profound that even the soundstage lights seemed to dim in response. Across the room, technicians paused mid-task. The camera crew held their positions despite the break, and even the director remained motionless, sensing that something unprecedented was unfolding. They were working on glass shadows, the echo protocol, a psychological epic already generating whispers within the industry about its potential to redefine the genre. But not even the most ambitious expectations surrounding the film could account for the moment that was building beneath that single beam of light. It was a moment born not from plot, performance, or prestige, but from the collision of two artistic forces whose chemistry defied conventional explanation. And it all began with a whisper of tension that refused to break. But behind the glamour and the excuses, what mechanisms are really driving this crisis? We will analyze every detail, from the initial mistakes to the irreversible damage, to see how the entertainment world works and how an icon is redefined. As Spader advanced another step, the room tightened into a silence that felt almost ceremonial. The crew did not yet know it, but they were seconds away from witnessing a declaration that would alter careers, ignite mythologies, and mark the beginning of a story that Hollywood would recount for years. Something irreversible was forming in the air, and the night was about to split open. The air on the soundstage still carried the fading tension of Menglong's last scene, a performance so precise and emotionally charged that even the silence afterward seemed to hesitate, as if unsure whether it was allowed to return. His presence had lingered in the space like a quiet storm, something controlled yet unmistakably potent, shaping the atmosphere long after the camera stopped rolling. Crew members who had been adjusting cables or reviewing notes found themselves pausing without reason, drawn into the residue of the moment as though the room itself had absorbed the depth of what Menglong had created. For weeks, Menglong had been navigating a complex web of expectations surrounding his role in Glass Shadows, the Echo Protocol. Industry whispers called his character one of the most psychologically demanding roles of the decade. Insiders spoke cautiously about the weight he was carrying, the pressure to not simply perform, but to redefine what emotional intelligence in a thriller could look like. And beneath the professionalism, beneath the calm exterior he maintained on set, the quiet intensity in his eyes betrayed the storms he worked so tirelessly to conceal. It was the look of someone who understood that the smallest misstep could alter the trajectory of an entire film. James Spader had noticed it long before anyone else acknowledged it. He had watched Menglong not as a colleague, but as a strategist, observing a rising force whose talent was beginning to bend the contours of the room. Spader was known throughout Hollywood for his precision, for the almost surgical clarity with which he evaluated people, scenes, and emotional patterns. And when he studied Menglong, he did so with an awareness that something extraordinary was forming, something that demanded recognition whether the industry was ready for it or not. Moments after the director announced a short break, Spader did not turn away from the scene like everyone else. Instead, he remained still, his focus locked on Menglong. That stillness carried a weight that made nearby crew members stop in mid-step. No one understood why the air shifted so abruptly, only that it did, and that Spader was the center of it. Menglong stood under the narrow beam of light, the afterglow of the scene still alive in his gaze. His breathing was steady, disciplined, but there was a soft undercurrent of exhaustion, the kind that only comes from pouring every hidden corner of one's emotional capacity into a performance. The role he inhabited demanded more than skill. It demanded vulnerability, memory, and an unspoken willingness to scrape the deeper layers of the human condition. It demanded excavation. And Spader recognized the cost of that excavation. For years, he had mastered roles that required psychological dissection, characters who operated with intellect sharper than the world around them. He knew the difference between technique and truth, between performing emotion and surrendering to it. When he watched Menglong, he saw the latter, a kind of artistic exposure that could either create brilliance or consume the performer entirely. It was this recognition that anchored Spader to the spot. The crew sensed the shift before they understood it. A sound technician lowered his headset, puzzled by the tension that had materialized in the room. A lighting operator hesitated mid-adjustment, waiting for something he could not name. Even the script supervisor, usually the most methodical person on set, stopped writing halfway through a note, her pen suspended above the page. The pressure surrounding Menglong had been building quietly over time, layered by cultural expectations, international scrutiny, and the internal demand to prove himself in a global arena. Hollywood had begun to watch him with a mixture of curiosity and caution, unsure whether his rising influence was a momentary spark or the emergence of a new paradigm. And Menglong, carrying that invisible weight, continued to deliver performances that seemed to come from a place deeper than training, deeper than instinct, something closer to inevitability. This was the root of the moment that was about to unfold. Not the scene they filmed, not the production schedule, not the cinematic ambition of the project. It was the collision of pressure, talent, vulnerability, and the keen perception of a veteran actor who understood when another performer was standing at the threshold of transformation. And in that quiet tension, James Spader stepped forward. The moment James Spader began to speak, the atmosphere inside the soundstage shifted into something almost ceremonial, as if the entire studio had been drawn into the gravity of a revelation. His words did not fall with the casual rhythm of conversation. They struck with intention, with a kind of quiet force that reshaped the air around him. Crew members stood immobilized, not out of politeness, but because the sincerity in his voice demanded absolute stillness. It was clear to everyone present that this was no longer a break in filming. This was the beginning of something that none of them had anticipated. In the hours that followed, whispers would thread through corners of the studio. The lighting team exchanged quick, disbelieving glances. Camera operators, usually unfazed by the most intense cinematic sequences, lingered near their equipment as though they feared moving would disrupt whatever truth had surfaced between the two actors. Even the director, a man known for his rigidity and relentless control, stood watching with a look that seemed to acknowledge he had just seen his film transform into something larger than its script. When Spader told Menglong that great acting did not imitate life, but restored it, the words traveled through the room like a slow tremor. It was the kind of declaration that artists spend a lifetime hoping to hear, and even then, only in private moments of reflection, never in the open air of a film set. The statement carried a gravity that echoed far beyond the walls of the studio. It was both a recognition and a challenge, a line drawn between tradition and evolution, spoken by someone who understood the weight of every syllable. The energy on the set changed immediately after that. When the director called the actors back to shoot one of the film's most intense confrontation sequences, the atmosphere felt charged, almost volatile. It was as though Spader's tribute had cracked open a barrier between the performers, releasing a new current that neither of them had fully accessed before. The moment Menglong stepped into the frame, the shift was unmistakable. His presence deepened, sharpened, and expanded in ways that defied easy explanation. What had already been an exceptional performance earlier in the day now felt transformed into something unrestrained and elemental. Spader, too, seemed altered. His usual precise, calculated energy took on a sharper brightness, a controlled fire that made his character's intellect feel almost predatory. The tension between their roles, one built on strategic manipulation and the other on emotional intuition, crackled like opposing magnetic forces colliding at the exact midpoint of their power. Their dialogue no longer felt scripted. It felt carved from the silence itself. Every line landed with a weight that pressed against the room. Every glance carried layers of meaning, shifting the emotional temperature of the scene with the smallest movement. Even their breathing seemed choreographed by something unseen, rising and falling in perfect rhythm with the electricity that pulsed between them. Crew members watched with parted lips, their eyes wide, as though trying to catch the edges of something indescribable. When the director finally uttered "cut," it was barely a whisper. No one dared to break the stillness that followed. The moment felt fragile, sacred, as if raising one's voice would shatter the lingering brilliance that had just unfolded. People exchanged glances that were equal parts awe and disbelief. A seasoned stunt coordinator wiped at his eyes, pretending it was dust. An assistant with a headset held her breath, as if the sound itself might disturb whatever phenomenon had just occurred. It did not take long for murmurs to spill beyond the studio walls. Within hours, members of the crew had begun hinting to colleagues from other productions that something extraordinary had happened. Word spread through text messages, late-night calls, and quiet exchanges in parking lots. Someone leaked a description of the moment to an industry blog. Someone else hinted at it in a private forum. Momentum built quickly, carrying fragments of the story into the corners of Hollywood where fascination grows overnight. From afar, observers interpreted the event through their own lenses. Some believed it was a sign that Menglong was stepping into a new tier of artistic influence. Others thought Spader was offering a symbolic passing of the torch. A few insisted that the entire incident had been orchestrated for promotion, although those who had been in the room dismissed the idea immediately. Nothing about the moment felt manufactured. It carried too much sincerity, too much depth, too much unguarded truth. What everyone agreed on, however, was that something had shifted, not only between the two actors, but within the trajectory of the film itself. Glass shadows. The Echo Protocol was no longer just an anticipated psychological thriller. It had become a phenomenon in motion, a story that people wanted to study, dissect, and understand even before its release. And at the heart of that phenomenon stood a moment of raw recognition, spoken under a single beam of light, now echoing through a city built on illusion and reinvention. A stillness settled over the soundstage, as though the air itself had taken a step back, waiting for something it could not name. The tribute should have ended the moment James Spader fell silent, yet the atmosphere only grew heavier, denser, almost charged with an unseen current. Menglong remained beneath the beam of light, the echo of Spader's words resting inside him like a ringing bell that refused to fade. His eyes carried a reflective intensity, as though he were standing at the threshold of a truth he had not yet dared to confront. Then the unexpected began. The spotlight above them flickered, not with the erratic pulse of failing equipment, but with the quiet, deliberate shimmer of something that felt intentional. Two shadows stretched across the concrete floor, one sharp and angular, unmistakably Spader's, and the other softer, fluid, yet perfectly defined, belonging to Menglong. For a brief moment, the shadows merged into one elongated form, a fusion so seamless that several crew members gasped under their breath. A camera operator whispered a question that no one dared to answer. Spader stepped closer. He did not break eye contact, nor did he raise his voice. Instead, his tone softened into something more powerful than any declaration he had made earlier. He spoke not as a colleague or mentor, but as someone who had excavated the deepest chambers of the craft and recognized the same raw material within Menglong. "People believe acting is performance," he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had spent a lifetime peeling away illusions. "But it is archaeology. We do not pretend. We dig. And what you have inside you is treasure." The word hung in the air with a resonance that felt almost physical. Crew members formed an unintentional circle around the two actors, their footsteps quiet, their breaths restrained, as if witnessing a moment stitched from fate rather than filmmaking. Even the equipment seemed to fall silent, the metallic hums fading into a reverent hush. Menglong's expression shifted, the composure he usually held so tightly beginning to tremble. Spader had not praised his technique. He had named something deeper, something that neither of them could fully articulate. For a performer who had endured months of pressure, rumors, and expectations, the recognition struck with a force more profound than applause. The air moved then. A faint gust brushed across the studio floor, stirring loose pages from a nearby table. The papers spiraled upward, turning in a slow orbit before descending in a perfect circle around the two men. A sound technician pressed his finger to his earpiece, confusion etched across his face. There were no vents active, no fans running. Yet the wind had arrived with the precision of punctuation, perfectly timed with Spader's words. Spader began to walk a slow arc around Menglong, observing him as though studying the final strokes of a painting, evaluating not the surface, but the layers beneath. His voice remained steady, almost reverent. "You move as if every moment carries intention. You look into a scene as though it is a mirror that reveals not who you are, but who you must become. That is not talent. That is destiny." The word destiny seemed to vibrate through the room. A small metal chime echoed from one of the lighting rigs, sharp enough to draw every gaze upward. There was no mechanical reason for the sound, yet it arrived with uncanny synchronicity, as if the space itself acknowledged the statement. Menglong did not speak. He did not need to. His eyes carried every answer Spader sought. Then the moment arrived. Without warning, without hesitation, James Spader bowed. Not a polite inclination of the head, but a deep, deliberate gesture of respect, the kind reserved for acknowledgments that transcend ego and tradition. The entire room froze. The assistant director whispered something under his breath, unable to comprehend the sight. For a veteran of Spader's stature, this gesture was nearly unimaginable. When Spader rose, his voice carried the clarity of a truth that demanded to be spoken aloud. This industry worships talent, but it rarely recognizes purity. You are the purest form of craft I have encountered, and you needed to hear that now, while the air is still charged with what you created. the overhead light brightened just slightly, revealing a faint shimmer around the two actors. It was subtle, almost invisible, yet unmistakably present, like the scene itself had decided to illuminate the moment. Menglong stepped forward and extended his hand. When Spader accepted it, a quiet understanding passed between them, the kind of unspoken pact shared by artists who recognize the magnitude of the moment they stand inside. It was not rehearsed. It was not engineered. It was simply truth meeting truth. And in that handshake, the atmosphere shifted permanently. Crew members would later describe it as an initiation, a transfer of artistic fire from one master to another. They would say the room felt altered, as though the future had already rewritten itself. That night, nothing felt ordinary. Everything felt inevitable. In the quiet that followed the final echo of their exchange, the soundstage seemed to exhale, as though the building itself had been holding its breath until the moment resolved into stillness. Crew members slowly emerged from their positions, each person carrying a private understanding that they had witnessed a convergence of artistry that transcended the daily machinery of production. It was not simply an emotional encounter between two actors. It was the confirmation of a shift, a turning point that would ripple far beyond the boundaries of the set. As word of the event moved through the industry, it did so with the gradual certainty of a tide. Conversations emerged in editing bays, executive offices, and late-night gatherings where individuals debated the significance of what had occurred. Some described it as a rare moment of artistic clarity. Others viewed it as a symbolic passing of direction, the recognition of a performer stepping into a realm traditionally shaped by older generations. Beneath all interpretations, a single truth remained firm. The encounter had marked Menglong in a way no public accolade could replicate. It had placed him within a lineage of performers who carried not only skill, but the ability to alter the emotional fabric of a story by their presence alone. The aftermath was not loud or dramatic. It was steady. It was deliberate. The energy around glass shadows, the echo protocol grew with new momentum, ruled not by marketing or rumor, but by the quiet fascination of those who understood what a moment of pure sincerity could mean for the future of a performer. Analysts and critics speculated that the film would become a centerpiece in discussions about psychological drama. Cinematographers noted the rare chemistry that could elevate even the stillness between scenes. Acting students replayed every leaked description of the tribute, hoping to understand the deeper mechanics of craft that had impressed Spader so profoundly. Yet the most significant outcome was internal. For Menglong, the moment became a point of grounding, a reminder that his work carried resonance beyond expectation, beyond pressure, beyond the constant negotiation between vulnerability and control. It validated the instinct he had followed quietly, the instinct to explore roles not through imitation, but through truth. In doing so, it offered him a compass for the path ahead. Hollywood has always been a place shaped by illusion, by the shimmering surface that conceals the precarious machinery beneath. But it is also shaped by rare encounters of authenticity, moments when individuals speak without pretense and acknowledge the deeper architecture of storytelling. Spader's tribute was one such encounter, a fracture in the facade that revealed the humanity driving the craft. It demonstrated that recognition carries power, that acknowledgement can unearth potential, and that sincerity can influence a generation more profoundly than spectacle. As anticipation builds for the film's release, audiences will come to the story with expectations shaped by these whispers of transcendence. They will search for the essence of the moment that ignited so much discussion, the spark that shifted the trajectory of both actors. And when the film finally reaches the world, viewers may feel the subtle pulse of that night, not only in the scenes captured on screen, but in the atmosphere threading between them. Stories endure because they contain truth. And on that night, beneath a single beam of light, truth revealed itself without hesitation. If this moment moved you, share your thoughts below, add your voice to the conversation, and join us as we continue uncovering the untold stories shaping the world behind the camera.